So far, we've talked about cancelled Sonic sequels, ports, and movies, all of which were scrapped and never saw the light of day. So let's talk about some cancelled Sonic spin-off games, and surprisingly, there are quite a few. Starting with Treasure Tales, a Tales-focused spin-off game for the Sega Genesis. Back in this era of Sega, Tales actually received a couple of different self-titled games, those being Tales Adventure and Tales Sky Patrol for the Sega Game Gear. So it's really no surprise that yet another Tales-focused game was planned for Sega's successful home console. According to game designer Craig Stitt, Treasure Tales was a puzzle-solving / isometric platformer that was pitched by Sega Technical Institute designer Bill Dunn. This was allegedly pitched in February of 1993, but Dunn denies any involvement with it, so we don't know for sure. This game's existence remained a secret until August of 2020, when Stitt uncovered one of his own VHS resumes from 1995. Here, we can actually find some shots from the game's pitch. The first screenshot shows Tails walking through this temple area, and the second one shows him walking on some sort of tiles that were most likely used for a puzzle. And I mean, who knew that Sonic Frontiers wasn't actually the first Sonic game to include boring-ass puzzles like this? And then we have a couple of more screenshots where Tails is crossing a pool of lava. In these screenshots, we can also see the isometric gameplay in full effect, as Tails can move up and down as opposed to just left and right. Honestly, I'm not losing sleep over the fact that this game was cancelled. While a Tails-centered puzzle game with Zelda-like dungeons sounds cool, I'm really not a fan of isometric games. They just give me a headache. If I had the choice, I would have chosen to make this game from a top-down view instead. I think that would have allowed for a much more comfortable experience. But yeah, apart from that, we have no idea how far this game got into development, or if it even got past the conceptual stages. But it's a cool idea nonetheless. Another cancelled Sega Genesis spin-off game called Sonic 16 was supposed to be a 2D side-scroller based on the world from the Sonic Sat AM TV show. From the demo footage we have, it looks much slower and more stealth and combat-based. We can see Sonic using multiple different abilities, like an attack where he throws rings at enemies, a spinning buzzsaw attack, and one where he launches spikes in all directions. We can also see many platforming moments, like this one that has Sonic balancing on these beams, and eventually you meet up with Sally and the demo ends. Visually, I really like how this looks. The animations in particular are very well done, and the expression of Sonic is great, making him much more cartoony than any of the other Genesis games portrayed him as. However, my one issue with the footage we've seen is that it just looks too slow for a Sonic game, and quite frankly, it looks pretty fucking boring, and that's exactly why this game was cancelled. The pitch was put together by game designers Peter Moriak and John Duggan, so sorry if I mispronounced any of those names, but Yuji Naka said no because it was too slow, and yeah, I'm glad that decision was made. While I'm all for a Sonic game that appeals more so to Western audiences, I don't think this was the right call. I've never been a fan of Sonic Sat AM anyway, so I probably wouldn't have cared for this game. Next we have Sister Sonic, a cancelled RPG for the Sega CD that was supposed to have Sonic's sister as the main protagonist. Now this was actually not going to be a completely original game, but instead a localized reskinned version of a game called Popful Mail. Think of how Doki Doki Panic was reskinned into Super Mario Bros. 2 here in the West. This is an identical situation. This would have been the first RPG in the Sonic franchise, but it was cancelled because there were a bunch of internal disagreements among the developers of Popful Mail. So they eventually thought it would be more effective to just localize the original Popful Mail game instead of going through the effort of remaking everything with Sonic characters. Eventually, we did get a Sonic RPG in 2008 with Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood, and holy shit, what a disappointment that was. But if they did release Sister Sonic, I don't think it would have done that well. Mind you, Sonic was just starting out at this time, with Sonic 2 releasing in the same year. I don't think the world was ready for a full-on Sonic RPG starring a brand new character. I am kind of curious as to what Sonic's sister was going to look like. There are some really well done fan-made mock-ups that I'll flash on screen right now. I think one of these would have fit pretty well in the game. Nowadays, Sonic sports games aren't too common. We had Sega Superstars Tennis, which may not even be classified as a Sonic game, and then we had the Mario and Sonic at the Olympic Games series, and that's really it. So it's very interesting to me how there was a planned Sonic sports game for the Sega 32X. This was first teased in an issue of the Game Players magazine from 1995, in which it reads, "Top secret, expect some awesome 32X stuff from the Sega development team Scavenger. Currently, the team is working on Batman Forever, X-Men for 32X and Saturn, and some other hush-hush stuff we can't talk about. Still in development is the long-awaited Sonic sports game, which is said to resemble Acme All-Stars with Sonic, Tails, Rystar, and the rest of the Sega gang, competing in sports events like basketball, volleyball, and soccer. Also, be on the lookout for the Neptune, an all-in-one Genesis and 32X unit that supposedly retails for under $200. So not only do we have a canceled Sonic game mentioned here, but we also have one of the many canceled Sega consoles. But I already made a video about those if you want to check it out. Anyway, it seems that this Sonic sports game was going to be pretty similar to how the Sega Superstars games were handled. It wasn't only going to feature Sonic characters, it was also going to feature more Sega characters, making this less of a Sonic game, but more of a Sega crossover sports game. I'm also interested to see how the game would have looked and felt to play. Given that this was going to be released for the 32X, I would probably expect it to be on par with other sports games released for the console, graphically of course. As for gameplay, they definitely had to change it up in some way to make it feel unique from other sports games, possibly incorporating different abilities for the characters. But yeah, we don't know anything else about this game, and we sure as hell don't know how far it got into development. But even with its cancellation, I kind of wish we got more Sonic sports games. Then we have Sonic Extreme, not to be confused with Sonic Extreme for the Sega Saturn, the only canceled mainline Sonic game, which we'll get into at a later time. But Sonic Extreme, spelt correctly this time, was actually a skateboarding game that was found in an old Xbox development kit in 2011. This particular build was created in 2003, which dates before the release of Sonic Riders, a racing game that has you race on hoverboards, leading many people to believe that Sonic Extreme served as a blueprint of sorts for Sonic Riders. Pretty cool stuff. There is a lot to unpack here, so I'm going to try to keep this as short and condensed as possible. The game has you playing as either Sonic or Shadow in these open skate parks based on worlds from the Sonic series. We have the normal skate park stuff here, ramps, hills, and even some grind rails, all of which you can trick off to get points. In mission mode, we have the objective of finding a key to get the Chaos Emerald, but sadly, when you actually collect the key, the game freezes, likely because the game simply wasn't finished. Then we have combat mode, which puts you up against another player, and then you have to collect keys to get items to fight the other player. It's a very basic mode, and honestly, it feels kind of unfitting here. And then we have race mode, which resembles the battle version of City Escape from Sonic Adventure 2. This has you racing on a seemingly endless track until you reach the end. You can tell that none of this stuff was ever meant to be released in a playable state. If you ask me, I don't think this was supposed to be anything more than a demonstration or tech demo for Sonic Riders. A skateboarding game would have been fucking awesome, don't get me wrong, but not like this. And then we have Sonic Extreme for the Game Boy Advance. Good God, why are there so many canceled Sonic games called Sonic Extreme? This was supposed to be a dual release with Sonic Riders, and Sonic Extreme was supposed to be a little side game to tie into Sonic Riders. I'm not entirely sure if this has anything to do with the canceled Sonic Riders GBA port, because apparently that's something completely different. This was supposed to be its own thing. Why is this so confusing? This game was pitched by Backbone Entertainment and was supposed to be a Sonic game heavily inspired by Sega's Outrun arcade game. It was rejected due to the lack of time they were given to work on it. I mean, yeah, sorry, 3 months is just not enough time to make a decent game. We have no footage from the pitch demo of the game, but Sonic was the only playable character, with Knuckles being the dedicated CPU character. There were around 2 to 3 levels made for the demo, and that's really all we know development-wise. We also have some cool artwork that was made for the demo, which looks really nice. But yeah, personally, I would have loved to see a handheld Riders game, whether that would have been a simple port or a side game like Sonic Extreme. Speaking of handheld games, we have Sonic the Shadow World, a PSP game focused on Sonic and Shadow. Information on this project was first unveiled by a channel called PTOP Online, who made a video detailing a paper pitch for a game called Sonic the Shadow World. This game would have had us playing as Sonic, trying to escape a realm called the Shadow World, which was basically an evil, darker version of Sonic's world. This world was also said to be Shadow's home, which already raised some red flags because it conflicted with Shadow's backstory. The pitch also stated that you would be able to play as Sonic and Shadow in multiple different game modes. That's it. I like the idea of this game. I've always been a fan of multi-dimensional worlds within stories, but story-wise, I think this would have benefited from a few touch-ups here and there. I'm all for an evil version of Sonic's world, that sounds pretty cool, but having that world serve as Shadow's home and then implying that Shadow is supposed to be Sonic's opposite from that world just doesn't sit right with me. And finally, we have a game focused on Sonic and Silver called Sonic Awakening. And there's really not much to say about this project because we don't have any solid proof of its existence apart from the game being mentioned on Pete Capella's website, who was the voice of Silver at the time, leading most to believe that this was supposed to be some sort of Silver-focused game. If this was a game that was actually in development, maybe it was planned to be released following Sonic 06, but since Sonic 06 failed miserably, they had to cancel it. And since then, Silver has never gotten the spotlight ever again, only appearing every now and again as a a side character. Maybe they'll revisit the idea of a silver-focused game if they ever did a Year of Silver, like they did with the Year of Shadow last year. But yeah guys, those are most, if not all, of the canceled Sonic spin-off games. So that wraps up another entry in the canceled Sonic media series, and if you haven't checked out those other videos yet, then maybe give them a watch. I'll leave a link at the end of the video. Anyway, let me know what you guys think about these canceled spin-off games in the comments down below, and let me know which one you would have liked to see released the most. But that's all for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all later. Goodbye.